if you are following users or interested in a specific project, a lot of those things will show up here. If you go into this part, which says your repositories are like projects inside of GitHub. That's where you'll store all of the files and folders associated with a specific coding project. So if you click into it, you'll want to name these something that's memorable because recruiters and other developers do take a look at these. You'll see something called a README. It's the first thing you'll look at when you land on somebody's page. And it's just, instructions, what it is, how to use it. And then you go into your files. And obviously, you'll want to make your files clear and easy for people to understand. The other part of GitHub is a little bit more like a social media platform. You'll see your name, your username, title, bio, something about you, and ways that people can get to know you. You can also personalize your page, which we'll be talking about a little bit more. And that's sort of a little snippet and introduction. There's also some community elements and ways we can interact with other developers as well.
So we're going to talk a little bit about some of GitHub's best practices now. And if you're already a developer, you should definitely know this. And if you're learning, it's always good to reinforce that when you're working on projects, to be thinking about having clean code. I think it is easy to fall into a trap if you're still at the beginning of your journey, that I need this, so I remember what this variable was about, or this should be obvious from the class that I'm creating or the function. But taking care to think, if somebody who does know how to code but doesn't know your project were to jump into this, how simple would it be for them to get started? So naming things clearly, having good comments can all make a really big difference. Because GitHub does allow you to share code both publicly and privately, if you do have a project that you're sharing that you'd like recruiters or other developers to see, you do want to keep in mind that your code should be very readable and easy for someone else to jump into. We talked a little bit about what a repository was in the video that introduces GitHub, which is a repository is basically your project. It can be as big or as small as you want it to. People have their entire applications hosted as repositories. Like for professional projects, you can host something as small as a single image if you wanted to. But when you are creating projects that you want recruiters to see, it's important to keep in mind that your folder structure is going to matter for people who are trying to follow along or people who want to build off of your code. So just keep in mind that every folder should indicate a little bit about what it is. And next we're going to get into the README, which is the first thing that anyone will read when they look at your repositories or your projects. If you are uploading projects to GitHub because you want a developer to build off of your project or because you want a recruiter to see something that you've worked on, you want to make sure that each one of your projects has a fully filled out explanation that tells what your project does, how to install it or run the project themselves, giving credit to other collaborators, and there's other relevant info that might apply to you. There's licensing, there could be videos or things that you find interesting. So this is a sample of a README that I think does a really good job of explaining what this project is about. If you look at it right away, you can see the title. It's a spam detector, so that gives you some indication of what it is. It's got an image. It very clearly explains that this was a class project assignment, and it has a one-sentence intro. I developed a spam detector program that classifies emails as spam. So it's just very simple, very clear right away. And this is something that you should consider if you are creating projects for your portfolio or for other developers to work with you. So Amanda, I'm going to have to lean on you a little bit here, but if you guys can post in chat which one of these you think does a better job. These are 2 sample READMEs. It is not a trick question, but please give just a short explanation of why you think the top one is better. And we'll wait for about 30 seconds here.
Can you hear me, Jenee?
Yeah.
Okay, great. It looks like some people are responding. It has more structure and detail, it's more relevant description, better summary, it has headers and formatting, it has examples of usage. Let's see.
Perfect. That is fantastic. And yeah, so all of those explanations are exactly correct. That's not the best phrasing, but it doesn't matter how good of a project you have. You could create the next text editor, you could create the next Facebook, and no one would know from looking at your README. And that would be a huge detriment to you when you're looking for a new job or if you're looking to work with others. So just taking the time to make sure that you've just filled these things out can make a really big difference. And it doesn't have to be overly wordy to make sense to people. Okay, so now we'll talk about ways you can make your GitHub profile stand out.
How to customize your profile. This is going to be pretty straightforward for this part of things because all you really need to do is edit your profile and fill out the following information. But to make a customized repository is a little bit different. So to go through and do that, we're going to go, typically you'll see something at the top of your home screen. However, I already have one. So I'm going to go into repositories really quickly. I named mine Jenee one. The way that this one works, it's pretty simple to edit. You'll just hit off the pencil. And this is in Markdown, which is a language you can read a little bit more about if you're not familiar. But it works a little bit like text. You can add titles. You can say, hi, my name is Jenee. You can preview, see what that will come out like. And you can even add emojis. I'll do a bird and see how you feel about things. You can add as much or as little as you want. You can add pictures, you can add links, you can add images. All of those are pretty much possible, and that's really all you have to do. Once you're done, you can add a commit message and upload, and you've got a fully personalized page.
So customized profiles, if you take nothing else away from this presentation, customizing your profile is a new feature that GitHub released about 1.5 years ago, and we'll talk more about it, but that's the big one for today. So filling out the details of your profile seems like it would be pretty straightforward, but you'd be surprised how many people forget to do this. Some of the things that I think can be really helpful for people when they're looking at your profile for the first time is including, obviously, your name, including a photo. It doesn't necessarily have to be a photo of you, but it should be a photo that represents you. And also including descriptions that matter or are important to you. This person included some keywords, a data science aspirant. She included languages that she's passionate about. This person is a pretty big open source contributor. So they actually have a sponsor button, which is really cool. If you do work on a lot of open source projects, I don't know if you're aware, but you can get compensated for your work by using that feature. That's a relatively new one. So I like to let people know just because it can be really inspiring to realize that you can, make money as an open source developer. You should also absolutely have links to your email. You should have links to your portfolio if you do have a website, and any social media that you think is relevant. Just think about it like this. If somebody comes across your profile on GitHub and they wanted to send you a job offer, how would they do that? And link whatever thing is necessary. So that could be your email, that could be your Twitter, that could be your LinkedIn. So please consider making sure that this is filled out. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the ways to customize your GitHub profile. I already kind of teased that by talking about how to customize using the new custom repos that GitHub offers. But when you're thinking about how to showcase yourself, I think it's helpful to start with asking yourself some general questions like, who am I and what makes me awesome? And how do I want people to see me in a first impression so that I can stand out and kind of put my best foot forward? So we're going to look at a couple of examples that I think do a really good job of illustrating what a really well customized GitHub profile looks like. This person is using the custom feature that we looked at in our video. And the way he's done this is he's added images that are hyperlinked so people can click onto any one of those projects to see something that's interesting. It's visually engaging, it's clearly laid out, and it shows a little bit of extra care. He also has an image included, and he has all of the information someone would need to follow up with him. All right, Amanda, I'm going to have to lean on you again. This is another question that is not a trick question. Here are two GitHub profiles. They look very different from each other. Let's talk about why the one on the top left does it better.
All right, we have that it's more visually engaging, has more detail about the developer. The banner really draws you in. There's more visual, more content. The cover image is engaging, shows your experience. It looks like a landing page, has good visual hierarchy. It's visually appealing. It's readable. The structure is better. Their user pick seems better. Serves as a portfolio with links to other social profiles. Wow, great answers. Easy to understand, clear and concise. Lots of good answers.
All of these are great. Again, see, it's not a trick question, but sometimes it really helps to see the contrast of what's out there because you realize, oh, shoot, I didn't realize that I needed a profile picture. Or, oh, shoot, when I was making my project, I didn't think about having a clear description of, what matters to me, but it actually does make a really big difference when somebody is looking at this for the first time. So the person on the bottom right has some really good projects, but you wouldn't necessarily know that because they don't have descriptions. They also aren't using the custom repo feature at all. And it's not that that's necessary or required, and we will talk about how you can make your profile engaging without using custom profiles in a second. But the big part is you couldn't follow up with them even if you really wanted to, because they don't really give you any indication of who they are, how to reach them, and that will really hurt you if somebody did want to reach out to you. It's also awesome that the person on the top left who has the engaging profile included things that they are interested in and things that they are currently working on. It just really gives you a great understanding of where this person is on their journey. So if you don't want to create a customized profile, but you do maybe want to make sure that people are able to clearly understand what your projects look like, there is a feature called pinning, which when people look at your profile, they're either going to see your custom profile or they're going to see your most recent projects, or they'll see whichever projects you've pinned to the top first. And one of the key things to think about, this is what a project looks like. This is what a profile looks like if the person has pinned some projects but doesn't have a custom profile. It has a different feeling. It's a little bit harder to understand who this person is or what they're doing, but the strength of the projects that they have available and the fact that he has very clear naming with some descriptions that are very easy to understand, you can see pretty quickly that he's worked on things related to GitHub, things related to Git itself. And it's also clear to figure out how you would follow up with this person. So this is just an alternative to consider, because you don't necessarily need to do a lot of fancy things to make something clear and easy to follow. All right. So now we're going to get into some of GitHub's community features. These might be new to some people, they might be familiar to you, but this section will help a little bit more in building your own skills as a developer and getting your name out there to other people within those communities. This is less about a recruiter seeing your own profile.
Next, we're going to get into some of the community elements of using GitHub. So if you're already following users or have starred repositories, you'll see all of this in your home feed. But if you haven't, I would recommend you go to the Explore tab. So the Explore tab will show you things based on your interests, things that are trending, projects that are interesting, users and developers that are interesting. Two things that I think are helpful are knowing how to star repositories. This will put them in your home feed. It will notify you of interesting updates so that you can keep track of projects that you think are interesting or exciting to you. You can also keep track of topics that you find interesting, which you'll see under this tab. There's a list of featured topics. You can see what's trending. So if you are interested about different projects that you think would be interesting to contribute to or that do something that you're excited about, you can find those here. You might say, for example, ooh, I'm into crypto. Let me star this crypto bond. You can also take a look at collections, which are tools that combine together to teach you how to do something really interesting, such as how to contribute to your first open source project. And then lastly, there are events and GitHub sponsors, which we can get into another time.
Community features can be helpful for people in a couple of different circumstances. If you are a recent bootcamp grad, but you're struggling to get interviews, or you're struggling to get your first software development role, using the community features of GitHub can help you, because this is one of the ways that you can get your name out there to other developers. So some of the things that we're going to talk about involve following projects that you think are interesting. This is pretty easy. You can find a company that you think makes a product that's interesting. You can search for a topic that you would like to be more involved in if that's something that you're interested in. And you can find companies that are working on the topic of your interest. You can find new projects, you can find new ideas. There are courses and resources for learning. And it's easy to follow those in your feed if you star the project. There's also discussions. This is a relatively new feature. It is set up essentially like a forum. Not every project will have a discussion, but quite a few companies are adding those. This is a place where you can ask questions, you can start topics related to anything really, but this is most useful if you want to be able to contribute code for a company that you'd like to work for. I recommend that you do this for startups. They typically don't have enough hands and they could always use the help. And this is a great way that you can get your name out there by contributing in their discussion forums. If you don't already know about contributing to open source projects, it's really easy to create your own copy of any public repository just for Git, which is essentially creating a copy. You can then work on it yourself. You can practice skills that are important to you. You can make modifications to the code and even merge them back in And that's a way that you can actually add back to the community. And this is something that I recommend for people if you are still struggling to get that first developer role, because this demonstrates that you can create code at a professional level, and this work will be in your GitHub history. For students, for anyone who is enrolled in, I believe, undergrad and possibly a grad student program, there are resources that GitHub makes available to students, which give you all kinds of discounts and resources for students so that you can access a lot of services for reduced or free. I recommend that you take a look at those. They are at education.github.com. There are also events and conferences that are aimed at students so that you can connect with other developers and, make friends within the industry. So if anyone wants to take a look at that on your own time, I highly recommend it. So this is the fun part, which is I am so excited to show you guys awesome GitHub profiles. This is a website that you can add your own profile to, where people have just really tricked out GitHub profiles, and they have all kinds of interesting, here, let's go to this one. Oh, guess not. Or you can take a look at profiles that you think are doing a really good job of being engaging, and you can use that as inspiration and copy off of it. There are also resources. I found a repository that offers stats that you can add to your custom profile. So this lets you, show that you've got an A++, and you can show how many commits you've made. You can show, how many stars and issues you've opened. There's another one that will break down how many languages you mostly work with. And I just thought that this was like a fun and creative way to make your profile a little bit more engaging. So those are my two favorite resources. That is, you can search awesome GitHub profiles if you would like to find that. And the other one is GitHub-readme-stats. Those are my two favorite.
I know people are really excited about everything that you are sharing with us. For you, what's the most exciting thing about GitHub? Like its most exciting capability? What do you think is the coolest thing people should focus on?
I think the coolest thing is definitely the customized profile feature. It's new. Not a lot of people who are regular developers know about it yet. And it's a great way to make your profile more engaging, and it's fun.
Okay, awesome. And Michelle's asking, how do you get started with contributing to open source projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is complicated. You can Google open source projects I can contribute to. There's a couple, I believe Code for America is one that I would recommend to people. They take new developers and really help them be able to make first contributions. I see Gabriella in the chat has linked a GitHub profile that talks about that, which is fantastic because it can be challenging if you've never worked on one before.
Great. And someone asked, is it possible, or how do you go about getting paid to contribute to open source projects?
I am not actually familiar on the process, but Google GitHub sponsor.
And if you're currently working on a project that isn't complete yet, what do you recommend we put on that GitHub repo?
So if you're working on a project that isn't complete and you want, If you're working on a project that isn't complete, but it's just in your recent projects, just keep in mind to have your code as clean as possible. And you can update your README as you go along. That's actually a good practice in general, which is documenting your work can make it things really helpful as you move forward and as you collaborate with others, because you have an understanding of what it is that you've created and you're organizing and documenting that and sharing it in a place where other people can find it. That's what I would recommend for somebody who has a project that's in development that they're not ready necessarily to show to developers. If you're making use of the pinned key projects, you have already displayed your top projects to recruiters, and those are probably the ones that they'll look at. So anything that you still have under development isn't necessarily going to be top of feed. Someone has mentioned that you can update the privacy settings if you have a project that you're not ready to share publicly. Mary, thank you for that suggestion.
Okay, and Megan's wondering, do you think that someone in a leadership type role, non-individual contributor, could benefit from having a GitHub profile?
If you are in a leadership type role and you foster relationships with other developers, then yes, there would still be a benefit to having a GitHub profile. If you are trying to build relationships within developer communities outside of your own company.
Okay, wonderful. And we have a couple more questions here, and they're coming in, which is great. Everyone keep asking your questions. This is fabulous. What could be good example projects to put in GitHub as a non-senior dev?
Any project that the answer to that is any project that shows what your skill capability is would be a good project, especially if you haven't gotten a role yet. Definitely have something that shows your understanding of data structures and algorithms. That would be really helpful.
Okay, wonderful. We have a question here. What are some good resources for learning Markdown?
Yeah, Markdown is a language. Search Markdown language basics.
Markdown, okay, perfect. Let's see here. How can we present our contribution in GitHub on work-related projects?
Oh, this is a nuanced question because, well, there's multiple ways to handle this. Many companies do use GitHub, but they have pretty strict privacy settings. I personally have a professional GitHub profile for my development work, and I have a personal one. I do link the two of them together so people can see them from my personal profile, but I keep a pretty strict separation between the two of them. I do know people who use one profile for both their personal and professional work, and that's your prerogative. People will be able to see your activity even if they can't necessarily see your projects. If you're working on behalf of a company and you're constantly making pull requests and working on issues, nobody will be able to see exactly, what you've done, but they'll be able to see that you have really constant GitHub activity.
Okay. And I think for that presentation, in your experience, what has that looked like in a job interview situation or a recruitment situation? What kinds of things do they ask you, or how does that showing off your GitHub profile, what does that look like?
Yeah, so your GitHub profile typically, by the time you've gotten an interview, your GitHub profile probably isn't going to be super duper relevant beyond maybe your very first interview screen, but almost every developer job application will include a link to include your GitHub profile, especially if you come from if your degree background is not computer science, people will look at your GitHub profile to see that you have some recent activity and some repos that have some level of complexity in them. And if you're a boot camp grad, that will be probably the biggest criteria for you to be considered for an interview.
Okay. And if someone really is starting to build out their GitHub portfolio, do you think that personal individual projects, populating it with that, is more important than contributing to open source? Or is one a stronger if you are presenting your portfolio to show that you're a good candidate to work somewhere?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say it would be a good idea to have a mix of both. And I say this for two reasons. One, the complexity of a project that you do on your own involves a lot of creative problem solving and decision making that's good to showcase. So do have some of those. If you can show that you can contribute to open source, you're demonstrating that you can create production quality code and successfully get it reviewed so that you have some understanding of how to work on a larger team. So that's why you should have both.
Okay, wonderful. And is there a benefit to keeping your personal GitHub separate from your work GitHub?
I really do think it's a personal preference. I don't think there's necessarily a benefit of doing that versus keeping one profile for everything.
Okay. Another question about private repositories. Can your GitHub profile from a private repository be seen?
Yes.
Okay.
Your profile is seen, like your user is, but your private repository can't be searched or found because it's private.
I understand. This is an interesting question. So I was always asking, as you progress in your career, would you remove very beginner projects you have built in the past, making them private? And this is a good question for all resumes, right? Do you deprecate your older experience as you get more experience, or do you let the whole portfolio stand?
I think of this like a hybrid LinkedIn. I don't delete LinkedIn posts from the past unless they are things that I think don't represent me well. I don't think people are going to see a project from 2017 and assume that that is representative of your skills today. So I personally don't. I do private projects if they're broken and I don't want to maintain them anymore, though.
Okay, that makes sense. And then what is the average, looks like, number of projects to show on the first page of a GitHub? So how many projects does a recruiter normally see?
I believe you can pin up to 6. So I would say don't pin any more than 6.
Okay, and for pinning, these are such great questions, aren't they? They're such a smart group of people. What type of repo should we pin at the profile?
The repos that you want to pin at the top of your profile are the ones that you would want a recruiter to look at first.
Okay. Let's see here. We have a comment about setting. Any tips on keeping up with or ramping up on different coding styles used by different open source projects? Great question.
Any tips on ramping up? I can't think of a concise way. I would Google whatever language they're using and try to do some tutorials on it. If I were you, I would start by searching projects that already fit a language or framework that you're comfortable with for your first open source project.
Okay. And how many program languages should we showcase? Is there a limit?
No, there's no limit at all. I would showcase anything that you are comfortable working with.
Okay, wonderful. Or jobs that you, like if you want a job in Swift, it would make sense to showcase Swift language, for example.
Yeah. The languages is always a tricky question because software as a whole is such a wide field, and there are companies that care a lot about whether you know this specific language, and there's companies that don't care as long as you show the willingness to learn. So that's a difficult question to ask without really knowing, what kinds of jobs you're looking for.
Okay. And we've covered this a little bit, but what type of information in GitHub will the recruiter look at? Do you have any insight? Is there like a hierarchy of what they're weighing as most important, and what are they looking for?
Yeah, recruiters vary a lot, but at least for the internship program that I got into for my current role, they look at, is your information filled out and is it clear? Does it look visually appealing? And do you have recent activity? And, do you have some projects that showcase your skills?
Okay. And is GitHub more useful than a personal portfolio site?
GitHub GitHub actually can be a personal portfolio site technically, because you can host your portfolio on it. There's something called GitHub Pages if you want to look into it. I have a portfolio and my GitHub. It really depends on, what kind of developer you want to be. If you're front end, you probably want your own personal portfolio site as well. If you're back end, you could probably get away with just using GitHub, I would say.
Okay, great. And I know that you shared some of the links with us, but is there a tidy place to find the links that you mentioned in your presentation?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I should haven't put something in a sort of tidy sense, but maybe I'll connect with you at the end of this, Amanda, and we can send something out.
Okay, perfect. Let's see here, version control. I'm just curious, people, like if 10 is my GitHub portfolio is ready to go and 1 is like, don't ask me today, I just kind of scale a 1 to 10. Where are people at with their GitHub portfolios? Mine's a 1. It's non-existent. So Carrie says 1, 7 says simple 8. Wondering if people want to get to a 10, how much time should they commit to that in your estimation? If they're like, I really want to get this as an asset for like my job applications and things. I know that's a really hard question to answer, but is there any people should commit, or what steps could they take to start moving toward that goal?
That's a very difficult question, but I would say that the top priority should be having your profile information fully filled out with a picture. Second would be the front, your portfolio when someone's looking at it should be clear. And that either means having your key projects pinned, and any project that you do pin should have a fully filled out description so that people understand what it is. And I would say, I would put it this way. The formatting on your resume and the font you use and the, italics that you use are less important than the projects you've done. So focus most of your energy on having good projects to showcase on your GitHub profile. But also do pay attention to when someone looks at it, can they figure out who you are and what you stand for? So those would be the 2 places to spend the majority of your time.
Okay, that's really helpful. Do we have other questions? We have about 10 minutes left that we can use. So we'd love to hear more from everyone. I know that something we talk a lot about at Women Who Code is imposter syndrome and helping people move over that, and especially for women in tech is something that sort of plagues. How can people find the confidence to go ahead and just post their projects, right? Like, is it at what percentage? We talked a little bit about if it's not ready, but how ready should something be before it can be posted? Or how can people gain the confidence to start making the work that they're doing more public?
Yeah, I would say this is going to sound sad, but people won't look at your GitHub unless you give them some reason to find you. So if you put something on your public GitHub profile, the chance that somebody sees it the next day is virtually zero. So that made me feel better because I, could work on it for months and months until I felt like, okay, now it's ready to share. And I was able to link that in job applications, or make comments on other people's, discussion boards and things like that.
Okay. Danielle said she already knew the basics, but she didn't realize how customizable it was. So thank you for that. Any other questions? I want to give everyone a chance to ask Jenee anything that we're wondering. Let's say you work for an organization, they're not currently using GitHub, and after this presentation, you're like, wow, I just really feel like my team should start using this. How can someone elevate this in their own organization or get other people on board to maybe migrating projects or work over to GitHub?
I've been on a part of a team that did a migration from Azure DevOps, which is a Microsoft product, to GitHub, which is another Microsoft product. I couldn't necessarily speak to the business impacts or implications for you because a lot of the other code hosting and versioning platforms are pretty similar. Obviously, I work for Microsoft, so GitHub is great. But you'll have to do your research on that.
Okay, wonderful.
All right. I saw one last question that was, can you put an open source contribution on your resume? Yes, you absolutely can. But you do need to make clear that you're not necessarily an employee of that company, but you're an open source contributor.
Okay, we have a question. Is there any advantage of learning Git?
Oh, yes, there's a big advantage in using Git. Almost every code versioning platform, not just GitHub, but Bitbucket or Azure DevOps, or even I think Google might have one, all use Git. And you'll need that if you are collaborating on a project with other people.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, if there is any other questions, we can end a little early. That's okay, because then people can pop over into the expo and things like that. But if there are any other questions, some Git classes on Udemy. If someone wanted to learn Git, what would be some of your favorite resources just before we sign off?
Oh no, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are a lot of YouTube tutorials.
Okay, wonderful. I also say in my previous life, I was working with Ray Wenderlich Cadeco, and we published books, and there's one called Git Apprentice that I oversaw the production of, and it's really like you've never touched Git before. How do you start? And it's called the Git Apprentice with Codeco, and I would recommend that as a resources to get started. We have Code Academy. Wonderful.
Awesome.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. This session's been really inspiring, and I see everyone is really excited to start working on their portfolios, which is great. Just by way of reminder, if you have a GitHub portfolio in your Hopin profile, you can add a website link. And it can be an open link, so you can add your portfolio to your Hopin profile for your networking today as well.
Ooh, I love that suggestion.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your Connect experience. I hope that you're feeling empowered, and I hope that you're finding good network connections here, and we'll see you in a session soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.